Having a conversation with your aging parents and grandparents around their finances is a pretty touchy subject. There are two common situations where we see a need to step in and ensure the retiree is in the best possible position moving forward. We're going to break down the video into two segments, and that is overspending and underspending. As mentioned before, discussions around finances, especially when there are concerns, can be very trying on a relationship. This can come across the very same way as asking someone to give up their car keys. An elderly parent or grandparent can feel embarrassed and powerless in this situation. Unless addressed properly, this can cause a rift between family members. In the past, the discussion was taboo and always skirted around since it was seen as disrespectful, but it's needed now more than ever as overspending later in retirement is all too real. The reason for this is what we'll call the online shopping era. Let's look at some statistics to give you a better understanding of what I actually mean by the online shopping era. The global pandemic has exponentially grown online shopping across all industries from clothing to furniture and more. This past year, the average online cart expense equated to $175 per purchase. And roughly 82% of all Canadians have purchased items online at least once in the past year. That comes to 31 million people. Now, before you say that this is mostly done by younger age groups, you're not wrong, but you might be surprised to hear that a substantial 34% of e-commerce purchases are actually done by those aged 65 to 100 years old. Doing a little math here, we're looking at a minimum of $1.84 billion of purchases by this demographic last year alone. Previously, when an individual was aging, this meant leaving the house less and resultingly spending less as well. Now we're seeing this ability to still spend, and excessively, without even having to leave your house. This all is thanks to the world of online shopping. Don't get me wrong, this is an amazing tool for those later in retirement who aren't able to leave the house. But if aging parents and grandparents don't understand the implication of online overspending, then they are destined for trouble. Once their funds are all dried up and spent, this means that they will either be left with government pensions only to keep them afloat, or you'll be required to step in and help. It can be a very difficult situation and discussion with your aging parent or grandparent without sounding controlling or greedy. Over the past month, there's been more than a handful of scenarios I've personally heard of where money problems occur with the aging parent and grandparent directly related to online shopping. In one scenario, the aging parent was frivolously giving gifts to family, friends, and to herself. This progressed to a point where the packages that would arrive at her doorstep, she would have no recollection of even purchasing. Who is it for, or what the package even was. So what are some telltale signs that you may need to start monitoring their finances for overspending? There's just a few red flags that may indicate the need to have a conversation around finances and discuss who is best fit to manage their funds moving forward. So every time you visit, there seems to be a new and reasonably expensive purchase. You notice they're making a lot of frequent visits to their local bank. And another situation where you might notice a concern is there's a substantial number of different magazines sitting around the home. This could identify that they're not even aware of how much they're spending. Now that we've addressed the potential concern of overspending among the aging retiree, let's look at what a plan looks like when underspending occurs and without a plan in place. Meet Grandma YouTube. She's a lovely 84-year-old living in Ontario, and her late husband was often the one taking care of their finances. Since he passed, she has not been spending much, just $3,000 a month. Going forward, she can't see this increasing as this covers all of her needs and wants at this point in her life. Grandma YouTube still has a substantial $455,000 across her retirement accounts and a condo valued at $650,000. but she's barely drawing down these funds over the years. She has only been drawing out the minimum required from her RIF and topping up her TFSA on an annual basis because there are always excess funds available. She has always wanted to help her kids and her grandkids as much as possible, but there is a concern that if she were to give gifts and funds, then she would eventually run out and just become a burden to her family. What she doesn't realize is that if she continues this path, her retirement accounts will still be valued at $495,000 by the time she turns 100 years old. Now let's look at a new plan for Grandma YouTube, where she can see her gifts helping family early on without harming her spending through retirement. And in this scenario, we're going to draw down her RIF a little faster to have the account emptied by the time she turns 95, which will result in less tax on her estate leading up to that point. Now let's address gifting money to her family. Grandma YouTube can comfortably pass on $120,000 both when she turns 85 years old and 90 to her kids and her grandkids. Some of you may think that this may be a little too much as we dwindle down her retirement assets to just $3,000 by the time we assume she passes away. But as always, our plan is to be conservative in the approach. To clarify, we've used a 5% rate of return, which we'd consider minimum risk, especially considering you could currently earn that on a 1-year GIC. Grandma YouTube has a life length of 100 in this scenario, but statistically speaking, there's only a 10% possibility of this happening. But we would rather plan for her to have funds until that age than to not. And finally, Grandma YouTube still owns her current residence outright. How many individuals after the age of 90 do you know where this is the case? By holding on to this property, this client has a safety blanket, which she could sell and rent, which would open more retirement funds if needed. After this video, my hope is that you have a better understanding of why it's important to discuss finances even when it may not be the easiest. Not only could it protect your aging parents and grandparents' legacies, but it could also jumpstart your families moving forward.